Hello and welcome back. This video is all about comparing Artrage 6 and Rebelle 4 in their ability to do portraiture using their oil brush tools or oil painting tools. And it's kind of a strange comparison in a sense because it's like comparing my two absolute favorite things. This is like an apple pie versus pumpkin pie kind of thing. You know, they're both great, but let's look at what they do exceptionally well, and let's look at what maybe some pros and cons are with user interface, brush texture, ease of use, hardware requirements. We're going to look at all of these things and more in this comparison, again, of Artrage and Rebelle. These are the two best pieces of software, I think, for simulating robustly, simulating natural media painting in a digital software platform. So let's get right to it. As you can see, first I'm painting in Artrage, and I'm using, it's like a sticker or spray paint preset for like the custom brush, and it's just like a splattery paint, mixing that a little bit with the Artrage watercolors just to give it some grungy underpainting texture. I love doing that. And then with Rebelle, doing the same thing, but I'm using the watercolor and the fluid simulation that comes from their watercolors. Just kind of getting it out of the way. And I'm eventually going to have to do this as well, but just the watercolors in Rebelle are unrivaled. They're so good. And you can see just that what's happening right there. It is amazing. Just the dripping and the pooling and the edges and all the cool stuff that happens with watercolors in Rebelle is pretty incredible. But this is not a watercolor review, so let's get back to the topic at hand. I'm using oil paint to paint in the darks in the Natalie Portman portrait that you can see in the Artrage painting. The Artrage painting is the one on the left, and the Rebelle painting is the one on the right. And I wanted to have these two side by side for the entire duration. And the reason why, and the reason why I didn't kind of record them both and put them together and then have you watch them both at the same time is that I think just to give yourself the ability to focus on each painting one at a time, looking at how they emerge, evolve, looking at workflow, looking at stylistic differences, and being able to see that happen in sort of real time. Yes, I did speed up the video quite a bit, but I wanted you to be able to look at one painting at a time and kind of see how it emerges. I'm using the same technical practice for each. I'm starting with some basic line work. I'm building my dark values, working toward the lighter values, trying to establish big surface planes where, just where light is being captured, where light is being obstructed, kind of looking for the big planar surfaces. And you see some of those darks in the hair, see some of those darks around the eyes, around the facial features. I am going to kind of ignore the backgrounds just for the sake of time. It's just a demo. It's just like a kind of a comparison test, and I'm not trying to do like a full perfected, refined painting, to every last brush stroke. But I want to give a good enough effort that you can really feel what you would be getting using these two different softwares. And that's an important point here, because I don't want to paint, entirely, throw myself entirely at my own stylistic devices here. What I want to do is kind of just do kind of an academic practice for portraiture for both softwares. And the reason why is I want the widest net to be cast to sort of encapsulate what most people would be getting out of this experience. And that way you can hopefully get a pretty accurate comparison between the two softwares as it relates to portraiture, as it relates to oil painting, as it relates to your technical practice. So what I find right away, and this is kind of important, is that I'm using my own brush presets, my own kind of custom setup for the brushes. Now I created a custom brush in Rebelle, and in Artrage I'm using the normal oil brush with just my own settings. And you can see those settings right here. I love these settings for the oil brush. They feel, it just feels very choppy and textury and chunky, but you can still get blending, you can still get nuance. It's my current favorite. So, I didn't see any reason to diverge or fall away from that. For the Rebelle painting, I don't like a lot of the brush heads that come as kind of the default set of oil brushes. So I changed some of the brush heads out and didn't have to do too much other than that. And so I just picked more of like a filbert brush head. And so you'll see, I guess that might be kind of a difference that is, maybe I should have avoided, but the Artrage painting is a little bit more like a flat, and the Rebelle painting is a little more like a filbert. So just that slight softening that comes from the edge shift that you get with a filbert versus that kind of angularity and geometry that you get from painting with a flat. But just kind of talking about the experience of painting. I'm still trying to figure out what it is, but I'm a little more comfortable painting in Artrage, and I think that could be just years and years and years of experience with the software, and that I still need to kind of refine down my exact settings for how I want to set up my paintbrush in Rebelle. But that's a small thing because they're both very satisfying to paint with. They both feel really good, and the outcome is also really good. I love how the paintings look from far away. I love how they look up close. And there are some things in some settings, some things you might want to tweak to get the best out of both pieces of software. And we'll talk about that as we get there. But I think it's important to note that overall, they're both fantastic. You can see that they both have a likeness to the model, but they are neither of them perfect. So the goal here was not to have some bravado about my portrait skills or something. It was more just to work on, going through the steps and seeing how it felt, how comfortable I am with each software and how comfortable I am with the kind of results I'm getting. How do I feel about it? And what I would say at this point is that all I had was curiosity. I was playing more with the brushes in Rebelle and trying to tweak a little bit and trying to understand a little bit. Whereas with Artrage, it just kind of was like, boom, just put the paint on the canvas, right? Because I'm so familiar there. But I would say at this point, the things I liked more about Rebelle would be that some of the brushwork just felt so authentically like oils, and the way that the wet on wet painting, the collision of paint, the way that all felt was just really good. But when you're painting in Rebelle, you need to be sensitive to the brush setting. So you have like oiliness, loading, that kind of stuff. But underneath that, you see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different settings for how much pigment is getting applied versus how much pigment is getting blended. And so it's the blending versus new application balance that you have these little icons to choose from. And right now I'm on that like second to the left setting, and that's the one that's like a little bit of blending but a lot of pigment lay down. So that I found to be a really good process, is to work firstly from that setting and then work more and more and more toward the blending options in the end. Artrage, by contrast, uses the palette knife for the blending. And while as an oil painter, I will blend on canvas with a brush, I'll blend on canvas with my finger. You get into the tools and sometimes you're just going for it, right? Whatever works. And I don't even ever use a palette knife when I traditionally oil paint, but I love it in Artrage because it's an elegant solution to the problem of blending. You just grab the tool and it does great work. And there are a few different settings and presets and stuff that you can use, including, and I love that you can do this, you can load up the oil or the palette knife and use that as a painting tool, a really kind of edgy, sharp painting tool. It's very cool. And it works that, while it may not be the way that I'd use oil paints, it is a reasonable thing to think that you could blend with this knife, right? So, but it's also reasonable to think that, the way that you use your brush in Rebelle, based on what settings you choose, you can turn any brush into the equivalent of the Artrage palette knife. You can turn any brush into a hybrid of both a lay-in brush and a blending brush, and that balance there is really, really cool. So it's also worth noting that you can, with all your custom brushes in Artrage, you can turn any of those into an eraser. Similarly, any brush you have selected can be used as an eraser in Rebelle as well. So it gives you a lot of textural opportunity, a lot of ways to explore different shape, texture, etc. So cool stuff all around. Both software solutions have a reasonable, have an intelligent, have an elegant and simple way to blend and mix. So that's great. Do you prefer Artrage and the palette knife solution, or do you prefer the brush oriented solution that you see in Rebelle? Now, Rebelle also has palette knives, but they work differently than in Artrage. They work more, it seems like they work more just kind of out of the box as paint applicators rather than just default blenders. And so there is some difference in the way that the tools are set up and kind of how your workflow goes because of that. Another thing about workflow, and this is, this one may be a big deal to some people, but it may be absolutely nothing to other people. So it's just the user interface. In Rebelle, which I'm working in now, and you see that there are a lot of menus. There's sliders and graphics and icons and stuff all over the place. And it goes all the way up the left side, all the way up the right side. And then I have a floating color wheel that I keep out, so it's easier for me to see the colors I'm selecting. And then, that's kind of it. But in Artrage, when I get back to painting here in Artrage, you'll see that it's just the color wheel on one side, toolbar on the other, and I keep my settings for the oil brush up as I work. But for the most part, Artrage is much less user interface and much more canvas, right? Much more drawing space. And I am sure someone's going to in the comments be like, hey, you can set it up this way or that way or whatever for Rebelle to keep it more clean or cleaner and more spacious. And I will explore that because you're probably right. I'm sure you're right. So that's something I need to look into, is the different setups for the workspace and the user interface. So just a couple early hits, like about Rebelle, I love the watercolors. They're so incredible. About Rebelle, I love the ease of use when creating a brush and the way that the brush heads and the grain work to create a really, really, really effective brushes. I really like the amount of depth that you have there. It's not like Corel Painter depth where you need to have like a PhD to get something out of that software in some ways. It's not like Photoshop, but it does lean in that direction where there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of like stuff you can tinker with, and that gives you a lot of options. But it adds some complexity. So, so it's kind of like pro and con, I guess. But I think paint application works great. I think the mark making is beautiful. I think custom brush creation is awesome. And overall, I like the look of the paintings. It has a very naturalistic oil painting feeling. It just looks great. Now for Artrage, I love the spaciousness of the UI. I love the elegance of the palette knife. And I love the chunky textural process that you can so easily get that for just, a couple clicks of the button, a couple sliders, and you're off doing some really nice work. The way that they both handle paint on canvas interaction, so that you get that like normal map and interaction, both texturally and in that like simulated depth, from the canvas, from the already existing paint on the canvas. And it all just like builds up to create this very, very realistic complexity on the surface of this digital canvas. It's amazing. Other things that they both do super well. Color picking is really easy. They both have elegant solutions for applying and mixing and blending. They both have a nice way to integrate references. But I would say that Artrage has the ability to have like many references, which is helpful. Not in this case, but in other cases. So I like that. There are workarounds. I think in Rebelle, you could just dump a bunch of pictures in the background on like the background of the canvas layer. That could kind of help. So what else? This is an important one. Hardware. I'm running a Ryzen 3600 with an NVIDIA 2060. That's like the RTX 2060. And I have 32 gigs of low latency DDR4 memory, and I've got the both software packages are installed on a really fast, not even SSD, but like an M.2 drive. So it's like bolted in right into the motherboard. It's really fast. It's really stable. So I have a good machine, a machine that has like quick access to memory, lots of memory, solid state hard disk, fast hard disk, decent graphics and decent CPU. So when it comes to performance, they both are good. They both run well. We're running like around a 5,000 by 5,000 pixel project at 300 pixels per inch. And so it's a nice density of pixels. It's a nice size canvas. And I didn't run into any hiccups. Although I could tell that it seems like Rebelle uses the GPU to render some of the stuff, because my computer would be a little louder, make some more noise. Fans would spool up a little faster when I was painting in Rebelle versus painting in Artrage. I don't even think Artrage uses the GPU. I think it's only CPU accelerated. Like there's no GPU acceleration. There's no handing off fluid dynamics or fluid physics to the GPU to simulate that stuff like you see in Rebelle. And so Artrage is kind of like it's like the lean. I don't know. It's just like it's just the leaner one. It's not. You could run it on your laptop. You can run it on a tablet. You can run it on whatever. But whereas Rebelle is more like you need to have good specs. I feel like a little bit more than with Artrage, at least. That's just a guess. I need to explore like kind of the maximum size that I can run on my home computer to see if that would help. But I do feel like there is a little difference in the design of the apps for what kind of hardware they're built to accelerate or utilize. What else? Let's see. I found that zooming in, when it looks good from afar, but when you zoom in, sometimes in both cases the texture can be a little overbearing. With Artrage, I was painting so choppy and so far away that I couldn't see that there was some artificial buildup. It really just looked kind of geometric and chunky, the texture of the paint. So it didn't, even though it looked great from far away, up close sometimes it just looked a little messy and a little bit digital. And so I had to use the palette knife to go back in and kind of soften some of that up. And once I got that done, it was perfect. But then with Rebelle, one of the things I noticed is that the Impasto Depth, that's the kind of the preset for how like thick and chunky the paint is set around 5 or 6 on default. I dropped it back all the way to a 2, and I felt like that looked so much better because the paint was a little too chunky, a little too fakey, and taking some of that Impasto Depth off, it just read a little more like I felt like it should. As I get closer to wrapping this thing up, I thought, giving you the chance to zoom in and see the details for yourself would be helpful. I thought it'd be helpful to tell you that I think it was about an hour of painting for each one of these portraits. And, I don't know, it probably would have done it a lot faster if I wasn't so exhausted this week. I tried to record the audio for these videos like 6 times last night, and I literally couldn't even stay awake doing the audio recording just because I was that beat. So we've been kind of doing double duty all week, and we're kind of feeling it. But that said, I feel like this is a fair and good comparison for portraiture. And here's what I would say, my takeaway is like, look how beautiful this looks in Artrage. Like, it looks great. You've got textural mark, you've got overlapping mark, you've got canvas texture, paint body texture, you've got interesting layering going on. It's just a nice piece. And I'm not saying that my painting is nice. I'm just saying it's like a nice piece because the software is really good. Now, in Rebelle, same thing. I would say this has like a softer feel. There's a little more blending going on. It almost reads a little more like a children's book illustration. There's just like a kind of a softness to it, the way that I blended things. And I think, whether you like this one or the other one more, they both read nicely. They both have a likeness to the model, and I feel like they both work. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope it was a productive and helpful session. I'm going to keep churning out these videos as best I can. Sorry I've been so busy the last couple of days. And you can please check out the YouTube polls or Instagram or my Patreon, all of these things, and just kind of check in. Let me know what would be helpful. Let me know in the comments what kind of stuff you want to see, because I'm getting excited about this and I want to keep sharing. So thank you guys so much, and take care.